Scouting Hot Finds Insiders Roundtable, and I'm joined by one of my insiders, Bill Mulrennan from New York. Hey, Bill, how's it going?
Hey, good, Jason. How you doing today?
Good, good. Bill and I have actually just met for the first time digitally, but he's been following me on my newsletter and my website. I've been following his website for a long time, and we're actually cooking up an idea to do a podcast interview, so that'll be kind of fun. But what we're going to do today is kind of take maybe about 4 topics, some questions and topics that Bill and I have come up with, and just kind of bounce back and forth with each other, and hopefully you'll find this entertaining. So if you like Boy Scout patches and memorabilia collecting, I hope you'll tune in and stick around for this. Bill, let's kind of kick it off. The first thing we wanted to do was show off something really interesting or special that you've put in your collection over the last few months.
Sure. Well, I've long-term been a member of Shashuga Lodge. It was where I was inducted, where I got my vigil, and I've been an active collector of that lodge for longer than I'd care to count. I have all of the flaps and odd shapes that have been issued, all of the event patches, but Shashuga has always had a chapter system, and there are probably a couple of hundred chapter issues, some of which are very obscure and difficult to find. So one of the items I've acquired recently is, well, it looks sort of like a mini sash, but it's a hat band that was worn around the old style campaign hats. And Nani Wai chapter was one of the chapters in Shashuga Lodge. So ticking a need off my my chapter list is always a good thing. And here's one other one, although it may not seem as impressive. This one's a 1991 chapter event patch from Tatanka chapter in Swanakee Lodge. And the one somewhat unique thing about this is it was undocumented. I was actively collecting Swanakee Lodge back in 1991. I was attending annual traderies that they were holding at the time, but for whatever reason, it missed getting noticed at the time, and I just came across one actually on eBay in a miscellaneous lot not all that long ago. And I contacted Gene Berman, who some of your listeners may know, who's been a longtime collector and a member of Swanakee Lodge, and he was not aware of its existence when I did find it. So it did send him scrambling to acquire one for himself. Otherwise, I would have had a good trade material with him.
Well, you've done well if you found something Gene Berman didn't have.
Yeah, it was not that easy to do.
You know, what's funny about OA chapter items, I actually had a similar thing happen in my own lodge. I was working with a younger guy to put together a little lodge patch book, and in just digging through a bag of stuff I had, I pulled out a district activity patch, and lo and behold, there was the name of the OA chapter for that district written on the patch, and I had never noticed it before, and so we stuck it in our book. So sometimes those chapter items, because it's such a small thing, they fly under the radar.
Oh yeah, and this one was an event issue that, you know, the district was able to attend, so most of them were probably earned and went to scouts who potentially weren't OA members, and you know, a lot of them, I guess sort of the same as Sash and Dash, probably attended 1 or 2 scouting events and, you know, dropped out, so they never really got into the hobby to any degree.
Right, right. Well, so I've got something to show you, and I don't think I've shown this to anyone yet. So talking about things that happened during the pandemic, I'll hold this up to the camera so you guys can see. So this is of course, a patch vest, this Western style patch vest. This one came to me right in, I think, November or December. And so I've had it for a couple of months now. The thing that really stands out and makes this special, though, is that it belonged to a professional scouter who was very active, sort of had a long career in several councils in the Carolinas. And that's, of course, where I am from. I live now in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so on this felt vest, there are several patches from my area. So kind of the cool thing you can see, he actually went to the 37 National Jamboree and served on staff. There's a regional staff segment right there that's pretty tough to get. But then also over here, there are patches from the camp. I'm actually now the camp director at Camp Barstow. So these patches here, this is actually a patch from the segregated scout camp that that council in Columbia, South Carolina had. So that's a pretty tough patch to get. But then you flip it over, and on the back, it just has some, again, more killer stuff. These are the first three area patches from the Carolinas, Area Z 1947. The gentleman who this belonged to was actually the scout executive there in Columbia when that meeting happened, 48, 49. And then also down here, there's a camp patch that stands out to me. This is the last year that the camp was located at what is now Fort Jackson. Some of the people watching may have heard of or gone there for a boot camp if you're in the Army. And so this Camp Barstow used to be located on that property. And then the government basically forced them out and said, oh, we need that land. We got a lot of soldiers to train up for World War II. So that's a 1940 Camp Barstow patch. It's the only felt Camp Barstow patch that I own, and there are ones before that. And that's a pretty tough one. I think someone told me they've seen about 5 of those or 6 of those. There's not too many of those around.
Yeah, that old camp stuff is tough to get, and always nice when you can find something.
And some of those camp items, as people know, they were basically awards to honor campers. It wasn't like a patch in the trading post that you bought lots of. So they were very, very hard to get.
Yeah, my summer camp, 10 Mile River Scout camps, most of the early items going back to the late 1920s and 1930s, as you say, were all earned awards. So usually found on a shirt and usually not in any quantity. So that's always a nice find also.
We have a COVID cat, Bill, so there's no shame in having your cat messing around. I told a story recently about the cat stealing my patches. So
yeah, I saw that one. My cat hasn't done that yet, but he, like a little kid, when you're on the phone or whatever, always needs attention.
Exactly. Well, so let's transition then. We also wanted to talk about new collectors, just to kind of give those guys a shake. And so kind of if you could maybe come up with a piece of advice that you would have for young collectors who are, like all things in scouting, impacted by the pandemic.
Sure. Well, since there aren't as many face-to-face opportunities to trade or acquire patches, I guess I would offer 2 comments. One, to use, online sources, sort of like the Facebook group, the Scout Patch Collectors Facebook group, or other groups that allow face-to-face or email virtual contact, I guess the word I'm looking for, virtual contact, and see, offer your home flap, offer your home CSP, see if you can make a few one-for-one type trades. And also, I've noticed that more and more councils and lodges are now offering online access to their patches. So if you do have a few dollars, check your council, check your adjacent councils and lodges, and see if they offer some patches. So if you're a little flush with cash, it'll give you the opportunity to bulk up your collection or at least your trading stock.
Yeah, it's a good point. My home lodge, which traditionally has never sold patches online, actually did it just like you said. During the pandemic, they had no events, no way to get out to people, but yet they had ordered the patches, ahead of time, and so they sold patches through the mail, and I of course took advantage of that. So yeah, I guess
I think a good venue for councils and lodges to continue to raise money and pay the bills.
Right. Actually saw some lodges actually have fundraisers essentially during this time period because they were not having events, no money was coming in, and I guess they had financial, a budget to fulfill, so they were trying to sell patches in order to meet their budget requirements.
Yeah, I mean, my home lodge did that. Kintakoying Lodge, the New York City lodge now, the result of the merger of all 5, actually has an ambitious program. They put together a Keep the Lights On program. They have committed to try and raise enough funds to keep the lights on, to pay the utility bills for a year at summer camp. And they've agreed to match the donations up to $20,000 that are received in that program. And they offered a somewhat limited patch. I mean, the quantity is 200, but it requires a $100 donation. And while there was some skepticism of that initially, I heard at the lodge meeting earlier this week, virtual lodge meeting earlier this week, that they've raised over $16,000 so far, which they're ready to match. And of the 200 flaps that were made, they only have 38 left. So
Wow.
it's been pretty successful. And if nothing else, with the lodge match, that's $32,000 odd that will be going to keep the lights on at camp.
Well, I've always thought with Boy Scout fundraising, if you have a stated purpose for what the money is going to go into, instead of just like going into the general budget, it's always a lot easier to raise money. People want to put their, and especially camp. Everyone has an emotional attachment to their summer camp, and that's what they will spend money on.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give a couple of tips. I want to back up to something you actually said about younger scouters finding a way to connect with other people. You know, Bill, you and I are kind of on Facebook and we've exchanged messages on there, but it turns out that one of the scouts in my troop actually told me that there is another platform that younger people are using called Discord. Now, Discord is kind of, I think it was mainly built and set up for gamers where people could go on there and play video games and sort of talk back and forth. But it does have the ability to create different channels, or maybe like we would think of as like a group or a room, a chat room. And so I have not actually gone down into this yet and gone and signed up for one. But as I understand, there are some Discord groups or channels, whatever you call them, for patch trading. And I think that's probably where a lot of younger people are hanging out. So
yeah, well, that's certainly could be another venue. And while I have heard the term, I haven't looked into it either. Maybe that's something I'll have to look at also.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. The Scout shared a link for me. I just confess I haven't like devoted an hour of my life to go explore it and go in. But I'll share it with you, Bill, and I'll also post it in the show notes for this episode. And so perhaps some of us older types can try out Discord and see if it's a venue for trading patches.
Yeah, that's always good to find a new venue and to help out some younger scouts. And I can be at least one of the graybeards
Right.
potentially in the group.
Well, and the other thing I like about the idea of younger people having a different platform is that, for example, in the Scout Patch Collectors Facebook group that you and I are in, there are a lot of really, really advanced collectors in that group. And sometimes they probably don't have very much patience with beginner questions or, you know, rookies, for example.
True.
And so sometimes people kind of get pounced on a little bit, and it can be a little rude. But so again, I'm glad that the younger people have found a platform that works for them.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Well, this next topic, I'm really interested to hear what you have to say. You know, 2021, the Boy Scouts hopefully are exiting their bankruptcy, and then aside from that, we also have COVID vaccine coming out. So we hope that the pandemic will dissipate. So, you know, again, this is sort of selfish here. This is Patch Collector talking. How do you foresee this bankruptcy, coming out of bankruptcy, kind of affecting the collecting hobby?
Well, I think there's probably at least a couple of potential things going on, and probably a number that I haven't thought of. For those who aren't aware, the Scouts, the BSA has talked about removing some of the region and area structure to reduce the overhead, if you will, the professional overhead that currently exists, and go to a territory system. So that will directly close out one area of region collecting, whether it's OA or just generic region items, you know, that goes away, and potentially opens up a new one where someone could get in at the ground floor for collecting whatever is issued by these territories. I believe there's going to be 16 of them when everything's said and done. New York is potentially going to be its own territory. I think last I heard Territory 12, but I've also seen Territory 10, so I'm not sure where that will all shake out. I'm sure there'll be more council mergers going on. There was one recently here in New York where Westchester Putnam Council and Hudson Valley Council merged as of January 1st to become Greater Hudson Valley Council. and the lodges have been told they'll need to merge, by this upcoming charter, at year end when the charter renewal goes in. So I would imagine, although I haven't specifically heard of anything else, there'll be some additional mergers likely over the course of time as they come out of the bankruptcy and fund, their lawsuit fund. They take their reserves for potential lawsuits or whatever. Will probably, as councils get their fair share commitment, it will probably, may well put some financially shaky councils, over the edge. And some of the consolidation, strictly from a financial standpoint, may make sense because certain things that have to be done 2 or 3 times now will be done once, at the greater council level, if you will. That being said, that I think tends to hurt, some of the legacy lodges or legacy camps that wind up getting abandoned, as some of the newer collectors, which I've seen in the New York City area to some extent. The number of the younger collectors are collecting Kintakoying Lodge, the current lodge, which has been around now for just about 7 years, just about 8 years actually in April. But there seems to be less interest in collecting some of the legacy lodges. So that's probably a knock-on effect also of collectors, based on what we'll likely see over the next few months and few years.
Yeah, I agree. Setting aside the whole trauma of bankruptcy and mergers and stuff, just strictly talking about collecting, I do kind of see that there's a little bit of an upside and a downside with this situation. The upside being that whenever there is change, there's activity. If there's new councils being formed, new lodges being formed, maybe there's the last anniversary set of this lodge that or this council, so there's kind of like an activity there that is sort of energizes the hobby a little bit. But I think the more long-term effect is that when you have councils that merge and lodges that merge, like as you say, Bill, there's less and less interest in collecting those because the new people were never a part of that history. They didn't ever go to a Shushuga, lodge event and wear the flap. And so their connection is not very strong to want to go back then and collect that lodge. So that does hurt. I am glad to see that at least I hear, I don't think I've seen anything official, that there's a lot of buzz about there being a NOAC in 2022. And so my experience with NOACs and jamborees is that always infuses a lot of energy into the hobby with all the new issues coming out, whether or not brand new patches and patch sets are really your thing or not. At least it gets everyone interested and definitely draws in new collectors.
Right. I've been the advisor for a lodge tradery, both Shushuga and Kintakoying, for 24 years now, coming up on my 25th anniversary. And we have seen a little bit of increased interest immediately after NOACs or Jambo events from the various contingent members, but not always a follow-through in subsequent years. But yes, you're right. It definitely produces more interest, at least in the short term.
Yeah, and there will be, for example, in my area, it's not clear how, like for you guys, do you anticipate having one mega New York conclave for the entire territory, or do you assume there will be an A and a B? And
I'm assuming there'll be an A and a B, or even potentially an A, B, and C. To go from Buffalo, New York, up near Niagara Falls, out to the tip of Long Island in Suffolk County is probably a 10 or 12-hour drive. And while that's, maybe modest for some of the western areas and sections, it's certainly not what people here in the Northeast are used to. Typically, our sections have been small enough that even if you're going from one edge to the other, you're probably talking more in the neighborhood of 3 hours to 4 hours, which is a little more drivable. If you're talking, mega conclaves, which I know are more appropriate down in the South, in Florida, and more down in your area, section conclaves here tend to be more in the 200 to maybe 300 range would be a very large one. You know, you're going to have camps that may have an issue hosting 1,000 people or 800 people. And if adults and youth members have to take off time from work or school in order to be able to get to a conclave on a Friday night, I think you'll see attendance drop because of that. Although obviously people do that in other areas these days. So you know, it remains to be seen. I see some sort of north-south or east-west sort of break, you know, within New York State uh, being the most likely, but I haven't seen anything even remotely suggesting what it will be.
Yeah, kind of talking to my local section chief, who seemed like he must be on sort of the know. He said that the OA, you know, will be kind of protected in this. They're not going to sacrifice the OA just for the sake of aligning a territory and having less professional staff. So it did seem like the OA would have the flexibility to create an A and a B and that sort of thing. And so in my area, as you mentioned, Bill, we do have some really big conclaves. The one in North Carolina is probably the largest of any in the country. It has typically 1,500 airmen will come. And when you think about a camp accommodating that, it's really a crunch. You know, not even mentioning COVID and social distancing. Even in normal times, it's a real struggle. You have to have circus tents and stuff to feed everybody. It's crazy. So there's just, it would not make any sense really to try to merge all that together. Now, having said that, there might be some realignments for us. So again, what used to be called the Dixie Fellowship or the Cardinal Conclave in North Carolina may have some reconfiguration and may not look the same. We've had about 25 years of really stable section alignment, and that's been really good for us. We'll see what happens, but
yeah, we haven't been as stable here in New York, and we have a couple of current sections that cross what will be territory boundaries. There's one New York lodge that is effectively in a Pennsylvania section, which will be, you know, part of another territory. And we have a couple of Connecticut lodges in our section currently, and that'll be part of another territory. So I think any realignment will probably, you know, make changes to that. Again,
right.
probably. I mean, who knows what we'll actually see.
Right, right. Well, let's talk about a couple of interesting things, maybe some positives that have come out of COVID. And one that I know you wanted to mention was something that the 10 Mile River Scout Museum Committee is doing. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Actually got a couple of things going on. I'm one of the trustees of the 10 Mile River Scout Museum, and I've been involved since its founding over 20 years ago. And we have a museum building up at the summer camp, have put a couple of additions on it over the years. But it's normally open during summer camp and for local visitors who may not be scouts any longer. And during COVID, you know, that hasn't been possible. They were trying to open it last summer, but with the various restrictions that were in place, it never wound up getting opened. But one thing they did do is they offered, every year we would normally have a TMR historian patch. And we also did one in 2020 with a little COVID emblem on it there. But since the scouts weren't able to earn that directly, we offered an online ability. You could take a virtual tour of the museum, complete a small questionnaire of certain facts relating to the scout camp, and earn the patch, you know, free of charge. And a matter of fact, it's still available on the museum website. It's tmrmuseum.org. There's a link from the main page, but also if you put in tmrmuseum.org/historian, you would see there'll be a link to, you know, to take and earn that patch, which, getting maybe back to young collectors, there's an opportunity to earn a patch for free that they might not otherwise have ever been able to visit physically. And the
It's a great
museum
idea.
has,
Yeah.
yeah, the museum also has offered a number of Zoom meetings or webinars where people will talk about various items of interest to scouting or the local area, both last summer into the fall, and they'll be starting up again in February. Gene Berman actually did one on patch collecting, introduction to patch collecting, but there have been a number of others. Bears up here in Sullivan County in the region, and There's an invasive plant species that the National Park Service spoke of. There's one upcoming, again, probably more local interest, but the Delaware Hudson Canal, which runs just a little bit to the south of, ran just a little bit to the south of camp. There's a webinar on that. So its ability to reach and interact with, scouts and scouters and former scouters and just interested members of the community to keep the museum in people's eyes. And, I guess the lodge program to keep the lights on is something like that too. It keeps people involved and motivated, even though they can't physically be together in many cases.
Yeah, and the thing that I participated in, which has been pretty amazing during the pandemic, is the digital Cracker Barrel that John Pleasance has organized with the help of Larry Lane. I actually went on there and did a talk about senior scouting memorabilia from 1935 to 1965, and that was really fun. I created a PowerPoint, showed it up there. But those guys have had, I don't know, 20 some, 30 some of these Monday night meetings where they've recorded it, and different people have given presentations. And so, that's something that probably only happened because everyone was stuck at home and somebody had the bright idea. So there is a little silver lining to this.
Yeah, and actually going back to the younger scouts, it's also a great venue for them to learn a little bit about the hobby and about potential areas they may like to collect without physically intruding on some old graybeards conversation and getting, maybe a little bit abrupt attention from.
Yeah, knowledge is power, and I think it's sort of a male trait, is that a lot of times we don't want to embarrass ourselves, get into something we don't understand, and so the more information that we can share online, the easier it is for other adults and youth to get interested in collecting scouting memorabilia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Bill, we're going to wrap this up. We want to just tell everybody that this is going to be kind of a monthly format. Again, we're calling this the Scouting Hot Finds Insiders Roundtable. We have a Patreon group set up. You can find it at scoutinghotfinds.com. Right now, Bill and other scouter Kyle are members at the level that would be joining the roundtable. And so if you're interested in that, go to that website. Again, I'll have the show notes there, link to it, and you can check it out. So, Bill, I thank you for coming on. And we're going to do a podcast interview very soon and hear all about your great New York OA site. Can't wait for that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Jason. It was fun.
All right. Very good, sir. Thank you.
Take care.